got the cornfield calm, Midwest tone, but he's spitting facts like a dog with a bone. Lanky frame, fire-haired, eyes on the case, breaking down the game in the darkest place. Sports scores to murder boards, Hoosier logic cuts like swords. From Friday lights to chalked out lines, this redhead's brain rewrites the lines inside the Hoosier mind, where the stories twist and stats unwind. He's a legend in flannel, mic in hand, digging deep where few can stand. From touchdowns to crime scenes raw, he's got the truth in every draw. Yeah, step in if you dare to find what's brewing inside the Hoosier mind. He'll talk Pacers, Colts, or Colts on trial. Hoosier humor with a devilish smile. He's that redhead sleuth with a box of clues. Takes your headline, breaks the news. With every stat and every scream, he's painting portraits in your stream. Don't blink, he'll tie it tight. From game night wins to murder flight. Inside the Hoosier mind, where the facts hit hard and the lines are blind. He's a ginger ninja, smooth and slick, cracking cases play by play quick. From courtrooms to the hardwood floor, he digs for more than just the score. Tune in and don't rewind, you're deep now inside the Hoosier mind.
All right, what's up, everyone? Welcome into Inside the Hoosier Mind, brought to you by Military Broadcast Radio, helping give veterans a voice. Back from the college football national championship game, we now have the new kings of college football. It is yet once again another Big Ten team, the third different Big Ten team in a row to win a national title, with the Indiana Hoosiers, the Hoosiers, taking the win over the Miami Hurricanes last night. And it's such a cool thing to be able to see, not just being from Indiana, not just being, for anybody who doesn't know, the term Hoosier is originally derived from being here in Indiana. There's a couple different stories as to where the term Hoosier came from, but nonetheless, though, everybody who's born in Indiana is considered a Hoosier. And the school down in Bloomington, IU, if you go there and you graduate, you are considered a Hoosier. They win their first national title in school history, and Coach Cignetti is able to do it in just 2 seasons, which is going to lead me to my first topic as far as what does this mean now for all the other coaches across college football? Because one of the things that we've noticed across the years, and it's always really been an issue, but I feel now personally between college and the NFL both, we have a pretty extensive coaching shortage. And what I mean by that is I'm not saying that there's not enough people to fill the positions. There's not enough quality people to truly fill the positions of good coaching and good coaches. Now, some of them, it's just not great situations. You know, if you look at some of the areas, if you look at the Jets, you know, Aaron Glenn did not inherit a great situation. Robert Saleh just got hired for the Tennessee Titans to be their head coach. To me, I'm not personally a huge fan of that situation. Yes, you have a young, rookie sensation in Cam Ward, but that's really about it. There's not a whole lot of other pieces that I'm even aware of on Tennessee that I would say, yes, that is a good starting job, or for him, a second chance at being a head coach in the NFL. So now in college, you have this guy that comes from JMU, and he's successful at JMU, leads them pretty far as going into the bowl games. He was 12 and I think his first season, he was 12-1 with JMU. And then he comes to Indiana. In their first season, he goes 10-2, right? 10-2. He goes 10-2 in their first season. The only 2 teams he lost to were the 2 teams that went on to face each other in the national championship. So that's pretty solid for a school that at the time had the losingest record in all of college football with 715 losses in college football for IU. And Cignetti comes in, no pressure as far as there's no crazy expectations. There's no expectation for him to go and win a national title. There's nothing saying, oh, take the baby steps, get 10 wins, go win, go compete for the Big Ten title. Nothing. There's zero pressure on him to do anything crazy other than just win a handful of games and just be consistent. And Cignetti takes that and he takes it one step further, because not only do they go 10-2, losing to Notre Dame, losing to Ohio State, which, it's not exactly the end of the world because that happened, but he does this. And then the following year takes them 16-0 on one of the coolest runs we've seen a team really do since the 2019 LSU Tigers, which I'll get to here in a bit as far as the comparisons that people like to try to make with them. So with him winning in his first two seasons, going 25-2, yes, almighty fish, I do like Cheez-Its. What does this do for college football coaches around the country? It puts a lot of pressure on them, and it puts even more pressure on them to succeed than it even did in years past. If you look at a lot of the coaches now, especially coming into some of the more blue blood programs, you look at Steve Sarkisian down there at Texas. There's a lot of high expectations with Texas, even though Texas hasn't truly been the dominant powerhouse that it was back in the early 2000s, 20 years ago. There's still a lot of high expectations down in Texas. Texas loves their football. They have a ton of NIL boosters. They have a ton of money. They have a lot of investments down there in Austin. Same with USC with Lincoln Riley. They get the big coaching name. He has a great quarterback in Caleb Williams. He goes 11-2 with him. And then ever since they've fallen off kind of from there and have kind of tempered to being, 6-6, 7-5, maybe 8-4. I don't really know or expect them to do much better than that as they continue to stay in the Big Ten, but we'll see how that goes. And anyway, it puts a lot of pressure on coaches, because used to with coaches, you could get a few years to really recruit guys, get guys into your system as far as who's going to work, what's going to do what, who's going to be able to really embrace the system that you have, right? And for coaches now with the transfer portal, everything has to move incredibly, incredibly fast. And it's kind of crazy that that's what we've moved to, is you now have an entire field of the sport that now you can't just, recruit your guys, have time to really get your system put in place. You have to basically rebuild an entire roster every single season and hope that it works. And that's the really crazy part, is because for a lot of these guys, they may be able to do that. They may not be able to do that, all honesty. And now with some of these guys, you don't know what your roster is going to look like going into next season. You can recruit a guy out of high school. You say, okay, I've got this 5-star quarterback that's committed to me. He's only committed to me for a year. And then he's like, actually, no, I don't want to be here. The season didn't end the way that I wanted to. I don't like where the program's going. I'm just disappointed with this. I want to go elsewhere. This team's willing to pay me more money. I want to go see other opportunities. So for these coaches now, the pressure that they have to succeed is so much greater than what it was, honestly, you could even go back as far as, 6-7 years ago, because you had coaches in certain programs that the expectations were high. You kind of look at a program like Oregon, the expectations are high because of how well they've been able to recruit, because of how well they've been able to really develop players and have deep talent up there in Eugene. Oregon was one of those places. You need to become a heavy contender, and you need to become a contender quickly. I would probably say Florida would even be another one of those schools, as far as if a new coach comes in, you need to be ready. You need to be ready to compete. You need to make the kids competitive. You need to be able to recruit well, and you need to be able to play well in the SEC. honestly, you could even argue for the Big Ten there. For a while, it was Michigan. We need to have a guy that's able to come in, beat Ohio State. We're consistently just here at, 9-3, 8-4. We're not doing anything crazy to move the needle. So to me, the era and the days of guys like James Franklin, who was able to really be in both eras of recruit well, develop guys, play really well, have your team well established, is essentially gone. And now you are going to have guys like Cignetti kind of, and I'm going to throw his name out there for the current moment just because of his historical success with it. You have guys like Lane Kiffin, who is considered the quote unquote transfer portal king as far as being able to recruit kids out of the portal and build these fantastic rosters like he did at Ole Miss. That's going to start to become the new norm for college football. And for some of these coaches, your timeline is going to be much shorter of doing that until there becomes a regulation and a standardization in college football, until they have some type of rules, until they start to do some type of contracts with college football. So that way, okay, I have for sure these guys all staying here next year. They're signed, they're committed. I don't have to worry about them going anywhere. And so I don't have to worry about this part of the roster. Now I only have to worry about finding these pieces in the transfer portal and be able to supplement holes that I've since, gotten from, guys transferring out, from guys graduating, getting drafted, et cetera, et cetera. Yes, Virgil, I started the program with the Hoosiers as the national champions in college football. And this puts even more pressure on these coaches because you look at Lane Kiffin, who got the big contract from LSU, and LSU has been one of these teams ever since that national title. The expectations are high. And I will say, as an LSU fan and as somebody who attends LSU currently, it's understandable because the product and the talent that comes from LSU. When you think LSU, there are a ton of NFL players that have come from LSU. And like I said, I'll jump into it a little deeper here a little bit later in this segment. But just from that 2019 national championship LSU team, 35 of those players went on into the NFL. Whether they were drafted, undrafted, whatever the case may be, were in the NFL at some point. 35 of them just from one national championship team. And that's just LSU. That's not including a team like Florida, big brand, a lot of money, historically very successful. Same with Texas. Texas has a lot of guys in the NFL. Another big brand, a blue blood program, if anything. And so for guys like Steve Sarkisian, for guys like Lincoln Riley, for Summerall down there in Florida, the expectations are going to be crazy because now you take a school like Indiana, who was one of the worst football programs for one of the longest times, to go 25-2. They had 6 wins against top 10 teams this season. They had 6 wins against them. They went 6-0. For Cignetti to come in and do that with a program like Indiana is unheard of. And that's where you're going to start to have these really high unrealistic expectations start to come in, because not only did Cignetti do this with IU as a program, Cignetti was able to do it with, it's going to sound bad because I'm going to say a lack of talent. And the only reason I say a lack of talent is because IU doesn't have all of the 4 and 5-star recruits that Alabama and Oregon have. The number is like crazy astronomical. It was like 4 times the amount of 4 and 5 stars that Alabama and Oregon had as compared to IU. And yet IU comes in and dominates both of them and wins wholeheartedly. So you have the weird expectations. And now you're going to have to start to really argue the narrative of, does it matter how many 5 stars that you have? Because we've seen a lot of teams throughout history and even throughout recent history. You look at a team like Texas A&M, who they've historically almost always recruited well. They've always been able to get high, 4 or 5 stars recruits out of high school and whatnot. And it's the coaching, or they're just not able to, get these guys to cohesively mesh on the field. And that's something that we're going to have to start to see. And that's something that we really have to start to look at and evaluate. And for anybody who missed the show last week, one of the guys that came on, Chris had brought up a good point because I asked Chris as far as, do we need to reevaluate what stars look like when it comes to being at a high school? Like if you're touted as, oh yeah, he was only a 2-star coming out of high school, he's only a 4-star coming out of high school. And then how does your college career project after that? Because you look at, Fernando Mendoza last night. You have a guy that if I remember correctly, he said he was a 2-star recruit coming out of high school. Miami didn't even consider him. Miami didn't even want him to be a walk-on. He goes to Cal, kind of gets his start there, gets some experience for a couple of years, and then he comes to IU and he becomes a Heisman contending quarterback because you have a coach and you have an offensive coordinator like Cignetti and like Shanahan. So that's also going to really put these coaches in a bad spot because now you are going to have to solidify your staff now more than ever. And some people will probably argue, well, they already do that. They already look for the best guy. And yes, that's true. You always try to find a guy. You always try to find, okay, maybe he didn't work in the system. Maybe he'll work with this. This maybe tailors a little bit more. Maybe you can get the players to tailor a little bit better to his system and vice versa. That's always been the case. I'm not saying that coaches are going out here and not trying to get the best product, but it's really going to show from top to bottom where these teams are going to be at and how much they have to truly contend in order to win a potential national championship. So it's one I heard earlier that this is probably going to be the most consequential national championship because of how much it has truly changed the playing field in college football. You know, are the days gone of true dynasty teams? Maybe. It truly depends now to me on who the coaches are, how well they can recruit, and how well they can try to get guys in as far as from the transfer portal, and how well they can build and supplement their rosters, at least until some type of true regulatory and regulation system gets implemented. Then, okay, we might have some dynasties again with with coaches being able to recruit, retain guys, et cetera, et cetera. Then we might have them. But as it stands right now, I don't think we'll be able to see a dynasty anytime soon because it's just all going to be dependent on who can recruit the best and who can basically dish out the most money to these recruits and who can coach the best. I think that's the thing that people really need to acknowledge with Cignetti is how good of a coach he truly is. And somebody had kind of made the outrageous claim mainly for social media clicks of, is Coach Cignetti in consideration for the GOAT conversation in college football? And I'm not going to say he's the GOAT because that's a little far-fetched. He's probably the GOAT here in Indiana because you managed to do the unthinkable with IU and not only take them to a national championship but win it and go 16-0 with them on top of that. Something that hasn't been done since I think it was like 1894 with Yale. So over 100 years, he'll be considered the GOAT here in Indiana. I don't consider him the GOAT in college football yet. And again, for me, part of it is consistency. Not saying he has to go win national title after national title after national title. Now, if he does that, yeah, absolutely. But I got to see some consistency. I have to see what he looks like because a lot of the guys that he brought in were all guys from JMU. Now he's going to have a whole new team, a whole new class. What does this IU team look like now that a lot of those guys are going to be leaving because they're going to the draft? There's a couple guys. I know Fernando's brother, Alberto, has already announced that he's going to go to the transfer portal. It's very likely he's going to go to Georgia Tech, which I get. They did bring the kid out of TCU. I think his last name is Hoover. I think it's Josh Hoover, maybe. They've brought him in and he's supposed to be on the roster. I don't necessarily know if that means they're going to start him just because of that. But he's got a lot of experience. And for, Alberto, he's going to want the chance to start. Now, do I say you should probably stay there with Cignetti? Because one, you're going to be familiar with the offense. You're going to be familiar with the team. You're going to be familiar with your teammates, all of that. Yes. But if he could potentially make more money, if he can for sure have a more solidified starting chance there at Georgia Tech, by all means. And, no offense to the ACC, because we just had an ACC team in the national championship. The ACC is a little easier to navigate than the Big Ten and with IU is going to be because Eventually, you're going to have to face Oregon. You're going to have to face Michigan. You're going to have to face Ohio State. You're going to have to face Penn State. You're going to face Michigan State. You're going to have to face a lot of really tough teams, and you're going to have to face them on the road as well as you are at home. And the ACC, that's a little bit easier than it is in the Big Ten. So, not completely against it, not completely upset about it, but just something that I saw that I was like, yeah, I don't necessarily know if that might be your the best move for you to do. But sticking with college football, and it's something that has really come to the attention, I would say, with the win of the Hoosiers in the national championship as compared to maybe the last couple of years. So obviously, the Big Ten's championship reign has started with Michigan, last year Ohio State, and this year Indiana. So with that, the narrative of the SEC being the most dominant powerhouse in college football has really started to die down. And a lot of people are now saying the Big Ten is the powerhouse in college football. And given the given the last three national champions and the way that they've won, it's a little hard to debate and a little hard to argue. And so it has really led to the question of, is the SEC's time of being the dominant powerhouse over? And is it now the Big Ten's yard to really play in and do what they want to do? Or is it truly just the NIL has leveled everything out? You don't have this, just massive hoarding of, star recruits, star talents, and these super deep teams like the Alabamas of old, where, you, you've got, like Devontae Smith is like the second or third string wide receiver. And then you've got Jerry Judy at like fifth or sixth. Like that's just nuts. The amount of talent that they had as far as depth in some of these rosters and whatnot. So even if one guy goes down, okay, I've already got another star player just in the weights ready to go. I think with NIL and with this, it just made everything more level. And I know a lot of a lot of SEC coaches, Nick Saban in particular, nothing against Nick Saban, they will probably never be willing to admit that they paid players. And maybe they didn't. If they didn't, I will wholeheartedly apologize. I'll eat my words, whatever the case may be. But I have always had the argument with Alabama of, yes, they've had a lot of success. They send a lot of guys to the NFL. I am not denying that by any stretch of the imagination. Nick Saban's a great coach. Obviously, he knows how to lead a lot of young kids, or at least he used to. Maybe in today's society, maybe not as well received as it was before. Because he has a personal commitment to himself to be the best, to win titles, to do what he needs to do. But Nick Saban is also a good teacher. He wants the best out of these young men. He wants them to succeed. He wants them to go out in the community and be well known and well respected, and have, long, successful standing careers and long, successful standing lives as men. And so while I don't disagree, and while I don't doubt that Nick probably did a really good job of recruiting, I do have to wonder with some of these guys, especially the years before NIL, of how did you get some of these guys to come to Alabama without using quote unquote NIL? Because you couldn't use a former player as far as being able to recruit because of the whole name, image, and likeness and whatnot. But if you're somebody like Nick Saban, if you're a young wide receiver and you're like, okay, what's one of the schools that I want to go to if I'm a young wide receiver and looking? Ohio State produces great wide receivers. LSU produces great wide receivers. Alabama produces great wide receivers. Which of the three do I want to go to? All right, now it's time for my visit with Alabama. Hey, Nick, what makes me want to come to Alabama? Because it is in a way a sales pitch as far as, how do I get you to come to the University of Alabama? If I'm Nick, Julio Jones, Amari Cooper, Jerry Judy, um, Devontae Smith, you've got a plethora of Alabama wide receivers for you to pick from that have been successful in the NFL, that have been successful at college. And to me, you can't tell me that if he goes to LA to recruit one of these kids, that he's like, hey, why don't you come to Tuscaloosa, Alabama, of all places, for school and to play football? Like, don't get me wrong. The before NIL, the image of okay, I can go in the NFL, I can be a star, I can make all this money. I'm not gonna I wouldn't argue. It'd be like, yeah, okay, that'd be tempting. But for some of them, there's so many other options that again, you can still be a star, you can still be the number one guy, et cetera, et cetera. But he managed to convince these kids, like, hey, come here, maybe be lower on the depth chart, sit and learn. Then when you get your chance to start, you're absolutely going to be a star, and then you're going to go be a star in the NFL. Like that is just crazy how he managed to do that for so many players at so many different positions for so long. And to, fully kind of bring all of this around as far as the tangent that I'm on with this, it's hard for me to believe that they didn't pay their players in some form of capacity. I'm not saying you're paying them millions of dollars. I'm not saying that by no stretch of the imagination. But we've had former college players admit, Justin Fields admitted that Ohio State offered him, I think it was a Lamborghini or a Ferrari to come to Ohio State and play with like a bag of cash of I think it was like $400,000. Okay, yeah, I'll come be your quarterback. I'll leave Georgia for that. Like you can't tell me Nick didn't do the same thing. And the rumor is supposedly a whole lot of SEC coaches used to do that. That's why you had Alabama for so long. That's why you had Georgia for so long. That's why you had LSU for one of those runs in there. So it's hard for me to sit here and say no, they didn't pay their players. I think you did. Again, if you did, that's fine. Just say it. Like, will people be mad? Yes. Will people ultimately end up caring because now it's legal? No. But that's just me. I think with NIL and all of this now, though, it's allowed teams like Ohio State to truly start to contend. Okay, we don't have to just try to recruit and be better than you at recruiting. Now we can spend money to get some of these guys to get the experience and whatnot. Same for Michigan, same for basically all of these schools now in college football. So I don't think the Big Ten is necessarily the powerhouse. I do think with the Big Ten, and one of the things that was brought up by Colin Cowherd, which I know people have love-hate relationship on if they like him or not, is the fact that a lot of these Midwestern schools have large alumni bases. They're pretty much everywhere. Um, and he did bring up a good point. If you're somewhere and you go to somewhere like Michigan, and there may not be a lot of the jobs open here in the Midwest because you've had people come before you and graduate, maybe doing the same degree, doing the same thing. And if timing and everything like that happens to work out and they're able to stay in the Midwest, they may. And you may be the person that's like, okay, well, I don't have anything here. Let me go to Los Angeles. Let me go to the West Coast. Let me go over to the East Coast. Let me go down south. Like that's why you're going to have fans and you're going to have alumni absolutely everywhere doing this. And part of it's also business investments. You have to remember college is also networking. So, hey, if I have somebody who also graduated business school with me or has an idea or has a business or anything like that, and I want to go there and work for them and potentially make a ton of money, that's absolutely what I'm going to go do. So again, I think NIL has just leveled everything more than it has made the Big Ten the dominant powerhouse. I think for the SEC now, and they're going to tout about the depth of the SEC, and I'm not going to deny that. There's a lot of really solid teams in the SEC. The narrative has to go away, though, that the SEC is the quote unquote only gauntlet that people have to face. And I know people are going to bring up the argument of, oh, well, the Big Ten, you have to face Purdue, you have to face Northwestern, you have to face Rutgers. You know, I know Maryland is kind of a toss up half the time. UCLA was kind of an easy cupcake for some teams, not all of them, for some. This year. So I'm not going to sit here and say that the Big Ten doesn't also have its cupcake teams. But for the longest time, the argument with the SEC of, oh, well, you have to face Georgia, you have to face Alabama, you have to face Tennessee, you have to face LSU. Okay. And no offense to Porter, because I know this is your team and I know you love them, but you guys have Arkansas. Arkansas is not exactly a powerhouse team like it used to be. They've kind of had their up and down years, but they're nothing crazy. Mississippi State, not really fearful. I mean, I know they had the upset win against Arizona State. They kept it close against Texas and Arch Manning, which how they managed to do that, I have no idea. You have Kentucky. Kentucky's probably the worst team in the SEC as it stands right now. Really super scared of them. And then up until the last couple of years, Vandy was the punching bag. Nobody's really scared of Vandy. Like if I have to go to Nashville and I have to play the Vanderbilt Commodores, I'm not super worried about it. Like, so this idea that the Big Ten is the only one that has quote unquote cupcakes and it's not the gauntlet that the SEC is, it's not necessarily true. It's just all in the scheduling. It's all in who you have to face. It's all in who you have to deal with. Depending on who you are in the SEC, yes, you are going to have to face some gauntlet of teams. You might have to face LSU, Georgia, Florida, Alabama, Tennessee. Depending on the year, depending on how good they are, you might have to face Texas A&M. You might have to face Mizzou. You might have to face Ole Miss. Like you're going to have to face, and now Texas and Oklahoma. You're going to have to face these quality teams. But let's not sit here and say that that's the only gauntlet of a schedule when you have a Big Ten that has Ohio State, that has Michigan, that has Oregon, that has, I know right now Penn State's not exactly the most fearful school anymore that they used to be, but Penn State was a pain there. And as much as I kind of dog on USC is still completely viable. Terry, hi Terry. I appreciate you tuning in, man. For anybody who wants great interviews and just great life advice, another great military broadcast podcaster, definitely check out Terry on the Tracers Around podcast. Absolutely fantastic. She always has great guests that are really cool because a lot of times they're either small business owners that you can buy locally here in the US if you want to, or if you happen to live in the area and you're listening to it. She has great people that you can buy local products from and endorse and talk to and whatnot. And then she's really cool because she brings on a lot of old war veterans. And I know some people, they always kind of get annoyed hearing old people stories. Old veteran stories are always cool because at least as a younger veteran, it's really funny to see that even somebody that has 40, 50 years age difference between them and myself, that they went through a lot of the same stuff that I went through, and it's like not changed in the last 50 or 60 years. I think that's the coolest thing personally. So definitely check out Terry's podcast of Tracer Round podcast. Absolutely fantastic. But nonetheless, though, I think all of these narratives with the SEC, it just means more, that the Big Ten doesn't produce NFL talent, et cetera, et cetera. I think all those narratives are truly going to start to fade away. And I think it's going to start to fade away as you have college football continuing to change. You don't have the dynasties as much anymore. You're not going to have these, you're going to have powerhouse teams. Don't get it twisted. You're still going to have teams that are absolutely dominant and somebody's going to ultimately end up winning it. Like last night, that national championship between Indiana and Miami could have gone either way. And I've almost fully expected Miami to kind of have the Ohio State Cinderella run of, all right, we have the biggest, baddest team left. We have Indiana. We're going to bully them. We're going to do everything that we did against Texas A&M, Ohio State, and Ole Miss, and we are just going to come out and absolutely dominate and win. And had they not done some really just poor managed mistakes, they potentially might have. They absolutely might have been able to do that. But as it stands right now, it just ended up not being the case. They made way too many mistakes. They ultimately ended up hurting them in the long run. And Indiana continued to show that they're very well disciplined, that Coach Cignetti has a very well-ran team. And a lot of people have said it's machine-like, and it kind of was. Now, don't get it twisted. They had some tough times, and they really had to put their head down, and they really had to push hard. But nonetheless, though, it ended up being a phenomenal national championship game overall. I'm truly excited for college football next season, just like I am every single year. But I truly am excited to see. I did want to put something out there, though, for everybody who does watch, or if anybody who's maybe catching the end of this or anything like that. I'm going to start having some content ideas for something to do as far as the offseason and whatnot comes. I'm still going to talk about college basketball as it starts to come in. I'm going to start to dive into that a little bit. But as we start to get into more of the offseason during the spring and during the summer, we'll have some news that happens that I'll talk about. I'm going to start creating a series as far as, college football for dummies, or like a crash course in college football. They're probably going to be really short videos and whatnot that talks about, the breakdown of what the conferences are. And it's not for my people who love college football like me. I mean, it is if you just like the content. And if you like me, great. Super appreciate that. but it's for kind of more the casual fan or somebody that, like me a few years ago, I really didn't know college football. I didn't watch college football growing up as much. Like it was kind of very casual and very sporadic. Um, but I'm still excited to see it. And that's going to be my new content for kind of this off season. It's college football crash course for dummies. I'm going to be talking about some of the great teams of college football history, both recent and past, the different conferences, what they mean, the different teams of the conferences, et cetera, et cetera. Landon, from a Bama fan, congrats. This team is a masterpiece. Hoosiers and Roll Tide. I will say, Landon, I'm fully transparent. I currently attend LSU, and I'm an LSU fan. So I'm not a huge fan of Bama. But I do like the respect that you're able to give. As much as I don't like the Tide, I have to respect the Tide for what the Tide has been able to do for a really long time. And it is cool because, some Bama fans might be a little mad about what IU did to them. But to me personally, I think that kind of gained a lot of respect for the Hoosiers because Alabama was truly their first big test outside of the Big Ten. They managed to beat Oregon on the road. Some people still didn't really believe. They're like, yeah, they get a lucky win. Doesn't really count. They're able to beat Ohio State in the Big Ten. Well, the Big Ten championship, a lot of people, it's an extra game, doesn't really count. It's not going to hurt either one of them. They're still both going to go to the playoffs. But for Alabama to come in, they beat Alabama in the Rose Bowl, and they beat them the way that they did. I think that silenced a lot of the haters and a lot of the doubters against IU. So a lot of respect to you for being a Bama fan, for not only acknowledging that, but for, cheering them on and, appreciating it. I did make the joke, and I have to ask you, because you're a Bama fan, because you're the Crimson Tide and Indiana's colors are technically crimson and cream, does that mean, at least for this year, Indiana is technically the new Crimson Tide? Just gotta ask. But I appreciate everybody tuning in. Like I said, hopefully this offseason I'm going to have more content for you guys as far as the history of whatnot. And Hoosiers have the torch now. Time for the Adidas brand to gain more traction in football. It will be interesting because Tennessee has their brand with Adidas. I think Penn State also switched over, if I remember correctly. So I think that's going to start to make a little bit more of a comeback. I really like what Adidas has done with uniforms. They've updated them, and they've made them honestly really nice. I loved what Adidas did with Texas Tech's uniforms. I think Texas Tech has some super clean uniforms. Don't get me wrong. I liked their Under Armour ones, but I feel like their Adidas ones are a lot nicer, like way, way nicer than what their Under Armour ones are. And I'm excited to see what Adidas does with Tennessee. Tennessee finally goes back to that after about 10 years or so. And it'll be interesting to see what they do with Penn State's, as far as do they kind of keep with a lot of the same tradition? Do they change a little bit? What do they do? But I'm excited to see it. And appreciate everybody tuning in and commenting. Believe me, this is an absolute blast for me. I love just talking sports. I love just hanging out with people and talking sports, especially college football. It's one of my favorite things to talk about. If you do want to reach out to me, if you ever just want to talk, chit chat, hang out, whatever the case may be, all of my social media links are down here at the bottom. You can pretty much find me everywhere inside the Hoosier Mind. X is the only one that is kind of weird, but I really don't use X. Full transparency with you. I'm part of the generation that grew up with it, but I never used it because I could just never get around sending a tweet. I just always thought that was weird. So if you like that, check out Inside the Hoosier Mind at pretty much all the social media. If you want to check out more great military veterans and other military podcasters, please check out MB Radio and mbradio.us up here. Check them out. There's so many other great podcasters that have a lot of stuff. There's other sports guys too, so it's not just me. If you want to, talk to a guy with sports, we also have great people that offer great advice. They interview other military vets. They interview small business owners. All of that. So definitely check them out. They're absolutely fantastic. Appreciate everybody tuning in. Like I said, I will be posting more content, probably shorter videos on some of the off season. I'll still be breaking news and whatnot. I'll still have more guests that come on and whatnot, but I appreciate everybody tuning in. Hope everybody has a wonderful week. It stinks that college football is over for the season, but it's also exciting because we get another new season at the end of August, and it'll be fun. I hope to see everybody there. But until then, everybody have a great time, and we will see y'all later.
Life is like a duck. Tough times don't last, but tough people do. Here at Military Broadcast Radio, we're teaming up with our friends at Die Tired, the veteran-friendly music band spreading strength, resilience, and mental health awareness one shirt at a time.
And check this out. Their brand new shirts feature broadcast beaker right on the breast pocket. A reminder that you can weather the storm and you're never alone.
Shirts are only $25 and proceeds support giving veterans a voice. MBR's mission to teach veterans how to podcast and videocast. Because when our vets are talking, they're not overthinking. They're not second-guessing. Together, we stop the 22 stigma. Grab your shirt today at mbradio.us and hit the shop. Or go directly to toramerch.printavo.com/merch/dietiredband. That's toramerch.printavo.com/merch/dietiredband.
Suit up, stand strong.
Remember, we're unduckable together.
You're built tougher than the storm.
Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for tuning in to Military Broadcast Radio. As we wrap up today's show, we want to remind you that the podcast of today's episode will be available right after we go off the air. So if you missed any part of the show or want to listen again, be sure to check it out. And remember, we're here to support and honor our veterans. Your stories and experiences matter, and we are committed to giving you a platform to share them. That's right. We're here to give our veterans a voice. So don't forget to catch the podcast and stay connected with us. Giving our veterans a voice.